On November 8, 2018, at 6:15 a.m., a small spark appeared in Northern California. There was no storm, no lightning, no explosion, just an old power line. Less than an hour later, the town of Paradise was burning. Fire moved faster than cars, faster than warnings, faster than people could escape. By the end of the day, entire neighborhoods were gone. By the end of the week, 85 people were dead. This wasn't the largest wildfire in California history. It was the deadliest. At first, officials called it a natural disaster, but investigators noticed something strange. The fire didn't start in the forest. It started beneath a transmission line owned by one company, Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, and once the evidence surfaced, one fact became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a wildfire. It was an infrastructure failure that everyone had been warned about. Pacific Gas and Electric wasn't a small utility company. It was one of the most powerful energy providers in the United States, and within months, its decisions would be linked to one of the deadliest disasters in modern American history. PG&E supplied electricity and gas to more than 16 million people across California. Entire cities depended on it. Hospitals, fire departments, emergency systems. For decades, PG&E operated as a near monopoly. Customers couldn't switch providers, cities couldn't opt out, the state relied on its infrastructure, and that power created a dangerous imbalance. While PG&E reported record revenues, its grid aged quietly in the background. Steel towers installed in the 1920s were still in use nearly a century later. Maintenance budgets were cut. Upgrades were delayed. Inspections became superficial. Internally, engineers raised concerns. Externally, the company reassured regulators that everything was under control. The public saw a stable utility, unaware of how fragile the system really was. Behind the scenes, PG&E was gambling with an aging system that ran directly through forests, hills, and towns, including Paradise. Years before Paradise burned, PG&E's own documents told a different story than the one presented to the public. Internal risk assessments flagged hundreds of miles of transmission lines as high fire threat. Engineers warned that aging hardware, combined with dry conditions and wind, created a critical risk scenario. One report was blunt. A single equipment failure could trigger an uncontrollable wildfire. Maintenance teams requested upgrades. Requests were delayed. Safety programs were proposed. Budgets were reduced. Instead, PG&E focused on financial targets. Shareholder dividends increased. Executive bonuses were approved. Infrastructure spending lagged behind. Emails later revealed the mindset. Executives discussed wildfire risk as a liability problem, not a safety emergency. The cost of prevention was weighed against the cost of lawsuits. And in those calculations, doing nothing often seemed cheaper. Paradise wasn't the result of ignorance. It was the result of warnings that were acknowledged, documented, and ultimately ignored. Paradise wasn't the first warning. Years earlier, PG&E equipment had already been linked to multiple wildfires across Northern California. In 2015, a transmission line failure sparked a fire that destroyed dozens of homes. Investigators traced the cause back to aging components that had not been replaced. PG&E paid settlements, issued statements, promised improvements, then it happened again. In 2017, a series of massive fires swept through California's wine country. Entire neighborhoods burned overnight. Once more, investigators followed the trail. Once more, it led to PG&E infrastructure. Court filings showed a pattern: the same types of equipment, the same maintenance failures, the same internal warnings. By then, PG&E had a choice: treat these fires as isolated incidents, or admit a systemic problem. Publicly, the company chose the first. Privately, executives knew the second was true, and Paradise was next. On the morning of November 8, 2018, conditions were already dangerous. Dry vegetation, low humidity, strong winds. PG&E knew this combination well. Internal protocols allowed the company to shut down power lines during extreme fire risk. They didn't. At 6:15 a.m., a nearly 100-year-old transmission line failed. A metal hook snapped, live wires dropped. Within minutes, dry brush ignited. The fire spread downhill, then uphill, then straight into Paradise. Emergency alerts went out late. Many residents never received them. Some were trapped in their cars. Others died trying to escape on foot. By the time firefighters arrived, the fire was already unstoppable. What investigators later confirmed made this moment even darker. The equipment that failed was on a list for replacement. It just hadn't been replaced yet. When the fire finally slowed, Paradise no longer looked like a town. It looked erased. More than 18,000 structures were destroyed. Entire streets vanished. Cars were found melted together. Houses reduced to ash outlines. Search teams moved door to door, looking for survivors. They found bodies instead. 85 people died. Many were elderly. Some never made it out of their homes. Others were trapped in traffic as flames closed in from both sides. Investigators documented everything: burn patterns, wind direction, points of ignition. The conclusion was unavoidable. This fire didn't spread randomly. It followed infrastructure, power lines, towers, maintenance corridors. Paradise burned along the grid. And once investigators realized that, the story stopped being about a wildfire and started being about accountability. And once that connection became clear, attention shifted away from the forest and toward the company that built and maintained the system running through it. Within days, investigators narrowed the origin point: a specific tower, a specific line, a specific piece of hardware. The failed hook was recovered from the site. It showed severe wear, metal fatigue, years of stress. Maintenance records revealed the problem. The component had exceeded its safe lifespan. Inspections flagged it as priority. Replacement was scheduled, but postponed. Emails confirmed the delay. Crews were reassigned. Budgets were redirected. Deadlines slipped. Then came the timeline. PG&E's internal system recorded a power interruption at 6:15 a.m., exactly when the fire ignited. The data matched eyewitness reports, matched burn patterns, matched satellite imagery. There was no competing cause, no lightning, no accident nearby. The evidence pointed in one direction. This fire began the moment PG&E's equipment failed. Once the cause became clear, the response was immediate and massive. Lawsuits flooded in within weeks. Families of the victims sued PG&E for wrongful death. Homeowners sued for total loss. Businesses sued for destruction. Entire towns joined class action cases. The numbers escalated quickly. Tens of thousands of claims, billions of dollars in potential liability. PG&E's stock collapsed. Credit agencies downgraded the company. Insurers backed away. Behind closed doors, executives faced a different reality. The company didn't just face lawsuits, it faced collapse. And Paradise wasn't the only case. Investigators reopened older fires. New evidence tied PG&E equipment to even more deadly incidents. The pattern was no longer theoretical. It was documented, repeated, and now impossible to contain. PG&E wasn't fighting a single lawsuit. It was fighting for survival. By early 2019, PG&E had run out of options. The lawsuits kept growing. The estimates kept rising. Analysts warned the company could face more than $30 billion in liabilities. That number alone was fatal. PG&E couldn't raise enough capital. It couldn't insure the risk. It couldn't delay the cases. So in January 2019, one of America's largest utility companies did something almost unthinkable. PG&E filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The move shocked California. Millions of customers depended on the company for basic electricity and gas. Hospitals, schools, emergency services. The state stepped in immediately. Lawmakers feared a total collapse of the energy grid. Behind the scenes, negotiations began. Victims demanded compensation. The state demanded stability. PG&E demanded survival. And while bankruptcy protected the company from immediate financial destruction, it opened the door to something far worse: criminal liability. Then, something unprecedented happened. Prosecutors didn't stop at civil lawsuits. They went criminal. In 2020, PG&E was formally charged with 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter, one count for each life lost in Paradise. It was a historic moment. Rarely does a major corporation face criminal charges for a disaster of this scale. The accusation was blunt. PG&E knew its equipment was dangerous. PG&E knew the risk of fire was extreme. PG&E chose not to act. In court, the company didn't fight the charge. It pleaded guilty. Not to negligence, not to regulatory failure, to causing deaths. For families of the victims, the plea brought validation. For the corporate world, it sent a warning. This case crossed a line. A company was no longer just paying damages. It was being held criminally responsible for the consequences of its decisions. The guilty plea didn't end the story. It changed its direction. The court imposed strict conditions. PG&E was placed under criminal probation for years. An external monitor was appointed to oversee the company's operations. Every safety decision, every maintenance plan, every dollar spent on infrastructure. The message was clear. PG&E could continue operating, but not on its own terms. Executives were forced to testify. Internal processes were rewritten. Safety metrics replaced profit targets. The company agreed to pay billions of dollars in penalties and victim compensation. At the same time, California tightened control. State agencies gained authority to intervene directly if PG&E failed to meet safety standards. For the first time in its history, the utility operated under constant surveillance, not by regulators alone, by the criminal justice system. The criminal case didn't stop the damage. While PG&E operated under probation, new problems surfaced. To prevent future fires, the company began massive power shutoffs. Entire regions lost electricity for days. Hospitals ran on generators. Businesses closed. Millions were affected. Public anger surged again. Residents asked a brutal question: how could a company responsible for deadly fires still control the grid? Inside PG&E, leadership collapsed. Executives resigned. The CEO stepped down. A new management team was installed under pressure from the state. At the same time, a victim compensation fund was created as part of bankruptcy. Billions were set aside for families who lost homes and lives. PG&E officially emerged from bankruptcy in 2020. But it wasn't free. The company now operated under court oversight, state control, and public distrust. The disaster had ended. The consequences hadn't. The investigation exposed more than faulty equipment. It exposed a system that protected failure. For decades, PG&E operated as a regulated monopoly. There was no competition, no alternative provider, no real exit for customers. Regulators depended on the company to keep the lights on. The company depended on regulators to approve budgets and rate increases. That relationship created silence. Safety upgrades were labeled too expensive. Maintenance was delayed to avoid higher rates. Risks were normalized. Internal warnings stayed internal. When problems surfaced, they were managed, not fixed. Each fire was treated as an exception, each settlement as a cost. No one forced PG&E to prioritize profit. The structure rewarded it. By the time the system reacted, the damage was already irreversible. Paradise wasn't the result of one broken line. It was the outcome of a system that allowed risk to accumulate until it finally ignited. The final numbers were staggering. PG&E faced more than $30 billion in wildfire-related liabilities. The company agreed to a settlement exceeding $13.5 billion for victims of the 2017 and 2018 fires alone. Its market value collapsed. Before the fires, PG&E was worth over $25 billion. After Paradise, its stock lost more than 90% of its value. Entire investment portfolios were wiped out. The human toll was even worse. Paradise wasn't the only tragedy. Investigations linked PG&E equipment to multiple deadly fires across California. In total, over 100 deaths were connected to fires caused by its infrastructure. The leadership didn't survive the fallout. CEO Geisha Williams resigned in 2019 as bankruptcy and criminal charges closed in. No executive went to prison, but careers ended, reputations collapsed, and the company's independence was destroyed. PG&E survived, but as a shadow of what it was. PG&E's story isn't about fire, it's about decisions. No storm forced the company to delay maintenance. No law required it to prioritize dividends over safety. No accident erased the warnings written years in advance. Those choices were made deliberately, again and again. The fires weren't unpredictable. They were calculated risks that finally came due. Paradise didn't burn because nature failed. It burned because a company decided that upgrading infrastructure was less urgent than protecting profits. PG&E didn't cause one disaster. It allowed many to accumulate until one of them killed an entire town. That's the real lesson. The most dangerous disasters don't come from chaos. They come from systems that normalize risk until the consequences become unavoidable.